Apple is the most valuable company on the planet right now. This year they broke a net worth of $2 trillion, putting them 5th on the list of most valuable companies of all time, and number 1 on the list of most valuable American companies of all time. If you invested $1,000 into Apple stock as recently as back in 2015, that investment would now be worth almost $4,000. If you go back further in time, those numbers become more and more ridiculous. So the question I want to try and answer is simple. Can Apple fail? Or have they become too large, too powerful to be dethroned by anyone else? In order to answer this question, we need to go back in time and look at some other giants of industry who have fallen for one reason or another. Let's begin with Kodak.
Only with the newest Kodak Instamatic cameras. 4 full-power flashes and 1 tiny cube. Flash Cube.
For you younger viewers out there, this name may not even be one that you've heard of. But once upon a time, Kodak was a household name, an industry leader in photography. At its height, Kodak held a 50% market share of the photographic film market in the world, and 80% in the US. It employed more than 60,000 people in Rochester, New York. By January 2012, Kodak had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. So what happened? The main issue in Kodak's case was that they put all of their faith into film photography. Kodachrome is the color reversal film introduced by Kodak back in 1935, and it was their cash cow for several decades. In 1975, a Kodak engineer, Stephen J. Sasson, invented the first ever digital camera. Kodak's management reacted negatively to his invention because it was filmless photography, and they instructed him to tell nobody about it. And ultimately this would be Kodak's undoing, their stubbornness and inability to react to change and innovation, even when the innovation came from themselves. Digital cameras began overtaking film photography, and by the time Kodak jumped on the bandwagon, it was too late. Companies that jumped on the opportunity earlier, like Sony and Canon, saw massive success, and the name Kodak slowly faded away. They are still around, and are actually profitable, but are a much smaller company than before, and largely due to this one massive mistake. But let's move on from Kodak. What about Blackberry? Once upon a time, not so long ago if you think about it, Blackberry was pioneering smartphones. It held a 20% market share of smartphones globally and a massive 50% in the US. Even I had one, the Blackberry Curve 8520, a pretty nice phone at the time, until our apartment was broken into and it was quickly stolen. But I digress. Blackberry was everywhere throughout the 2000s. But then a momentous occasion happened.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
This was a revolution, something consumers had never seen before, a huge leap in innovation. But BlackBerry were not afraid and didn't view the iPhone as competition, since it didn't cater specifically to the business market where BlackBerry was so dominant. And so they kept releasing the same kind of phone with a keyboard, over and over again. They didn't die immediately. In fact, 2011 was their best year ever, 4 years after the iPhone was introduced. But the iPhone was BlackBerry's death warrant. They underestimated how quickly the smartphone market was changing. They had a great product, but were too scared to make any big, revolutionary changes, opting instead for small iterations that improved the devices over time. But that wasn't enough. And by 2016, BlackBerry managed to sell only 200,000 phones, which left them with a market share of 0%. In 2016, Chinese consumer electronics company TCL bought the BlackBerry brand and the name disappeared from the smartphone market. So I think we're starting to notice a trend here, and if we keep going we'll see more and more of the same kind of thing. Nokia, once the world's best-selling phone brand, also fell to the iPhone by failing to compete in the high-end market. Top executives were afraid to admit that Symbian, Nokia's operating system, was inferior to iOS. And instead of thinking long term, they continued to develop new phones to meet short term market demands. Nokia's market value dropped by 90% in just 3 years, and in 2013 they were acquired by Microsoft, who later sold them once they realized they also could not compete in the mobile phone market. Anyway, we could lay out several more examples that would ultimately lead us to the same conclusion. Any company can fail, no matter how large, if they cannot see past the present and look towards the future. Now that we've answered that question, I think it would be fun to take a look at whether or not Apple will fail. Some might argue that, in a way, Apple already has failed. The iPhone, Apple's biggest innovation, and the device that saw their rise to the top, is no longer unique on the market. Whilst it's true Apple had a massive head start with the iPhone, other manufacturers have caught up. Samsung, Huawei, Xiaomi, and many others now offer devices with all the same and, in some cases, more features than the iPhone, often at lower prices. Apple has received plenty of criticism in recent years about their lack of innovation and how this may ultimately become their undoing, much like what happened with many of our previous examples. Back when Steve Jobs was still around, Apple was a much smaller company, and in order to succeed, they had to think differently. A slogan that Apple actually used from 1997 to 2002. If you're familiar with David versus Goliath, Apple at one time were David, and in order for them to succeed, they had to change the rules of engagement. Which is exactly what they did time and time again. Apple were masters at creating disruptive innovation that changed the status quo, displacing established leading firms and products with their own. Often these were risky moves which had the potential to backfire and hurt themselves, but these were the moves they had to make at the time. The original iPod was a game changer. Suddenly you could have 1,000 songs in your pocket. It was smaller, lighter, and faster for transferring music than anything else out there. Of course, over time copycats would pop up and start making similar products, so they would launch the next iPod to make it even smaller and lighter with the iPod mini. Once the copycats caught up, they launched the iPod Nano, and this went on for a while. Then you have the iPhone. This needs no introduction or explanation, but simply put, it took the world by storm. The iPad was a similar achievement. And let's not forget about Steve Jobs himself. In business, the man was a visionary and perhaps one of the best salesmen of all time. He didn't just present new Apple products like Tim Cook and others do today. He made you feel a certain way about the new products. Jobs didn't just make you feel like your life would be better off by purchasing Apple products, he made you feel like your life would be worse off if you didn't. But unfortunately, Steve Jobs passed away, and Apple today is Goliath rather than David. So from a business and operational perspective, it makes sense for them to play to their strengths. They no longer need to take massive risks to get ahead, because they are ahead in many ways. They have a massive loyal customer base who are tied into their ecosystem. Trying to leave that ecosystem is quite the undertaking. They have a vast product portfolio that meets almost everyone's needs from kids to creative professionals. And they have an established manufacturing and distribution platform that has proven to work well over the past decade. As long as they do enough to keep people happy, they will continue to be successful. That is, unless someone else comes onto the market and disrupts the technological landscape. And whilst that may seem very unlikely, it certainly isn't impossible, and it is something that several companies are trying to do. So I will conclude this video by asking you, do you think Apple will fail? And why? Thank you guys for watching as always. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time.